everybody, this is Barry Johnson, and welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. This is my second video giving you some examples of my new M1 Pro MacBook Pro and seeing what we can do in it. Today, I've got a maxed out Pro Tools session with nothing but unsupported plugins. Let's see how it handles it. Let's get to it. All right. So welcome back. So before we get started, let's talk about the specs on my 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. It has a 10-core CPU and a 16-core GPU. Has 16 gigabyte of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. Now that's not the entry level, it's the next step up. And the only reason, to be honest with you, that I went with the next step up is I had to have a 1 terabyte SSD. I learned that from my MacBook Air days, my M1 MacBook Air days, that I've got to have at least a 1 terabyte SSD. And my recommendation is also to get 16 gigabyte of RAM. If you can swing 32, it could be helpful. Although if you look at my other video that I did where I stress tested this machine on both Logic as well as Pro Tools, with virtual instruments as well as tracks. I think I showed recording 400 audio tracks with a buffer of 32, each with a couple of plugins each on them. I think maybe 3 actually. I did one with a boatload of virtual instruments and a boatload of audio tracks at the same time, all at a 32 buffer, as well as one with a, I think 200 virtual instruments all playing at the same time in Logic, and all at a 32 buffer. Okay, so today that's a spec. So this machine is a $24.99 one versus a $19.99. Now, my recommendation for most people, and this is just my 2 cents, you can come to your own conclusions out there, is to get the base $19.99 model and then bump that up to a 1 terabyte SSD and save yourself several $100s. I don't think you benefit that much by the additional 2 cores of both GPU and CPU. But regardless, this test here may prove that different. Now, today, I'm doing nothing but unsupported plugins. That's all you're going to see today. There's not a single plugin in here that's not only are they not Big Sur certified, they're not M1 certified. Okay, and so that is about the extreme. And so obviously, I'm not going to get as many instances of this as I normally would. Now, let's talk about my Pro Tools session. Okay, so now let's go over to my screen over here, where you can see Pro Tools here, and you can see I've got a lot of tracks going on there. Let's take it over to the mix window, where you can see there's a boatload of tracks. So what have I got in this session is going to be your first question. Okay, so we're going to start out first. This was recorded at a buffer of 44.1, or sample rate of 44.1. The buffer on this is actually 1024, and to do everything I've done here, I couldn't take it below that without it giving me some issues. 512 did a pretty good job the majority of the way through it, but ultimately I had to keep this at 1024. So keep that in mind too as we're looking at this. All right. What I've got is a playback, Pro Tools playback cache size of 12 gigabyte of RAM. Okay, so it's taken almost all of my RAM, or giving it and making it available for cache and that. Still not sure how that works with the way it works on the M1 Pro, as far as how they swap RAM back and forth between the SSD drive as well as other things. But anyway, within Pro Tools, I set that to 12 gigabyte. Okay, on here I've got 6 track buses, where you can see I've got my drums, my bass, my guitar, my vocal, my backup vocal, and my vocal effects. So I've got 6 buses going on there, and so as well as that, I've got 80 audio tracks, 80 audio tracks going on. And then on each of those audio tracks, I've got 5 stereo sends happening. Okay. Now, in addition to that, you can see here where I've got 5 stereo sends right there going on, and they feed back over here. Okay. That's where they're feeding back to. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay. So let's go back over here. So I've got 5 sends going on. Okay. And so on top of that, I've got 4 particular tracks that are going to outboard hardware. One of them is going to one 1176 I have, another is going to another 1176 I have. One is going to an LA2A clone, and the other a 500 series LA3 clone from Audioscape. I did a review on that, and if you're interested in checking that compressor out, it is a fan-freaking-tastic compressor. That is the Audioscape V3A. So go check that out. It's a fan-freaking-tastic deal. So one of the things, you're not going to hear the audio playing because I'm going to have to get a separate mixer. I got to wire a few other things, make some custom cables to be able to get both the audio of my Pro Tools session as well as to be able to track the audio within my screen recording software. So that's a little glitch I've got to work out. So you're not actually going to hear that throughout this. You're just going to trust me, it's playing, okay? And it is playing. You'll be able to see that happening. So on each track, what do I have? Okay, in this session of 80 tracks, I have a total of 77 soft TubeTech CL1B Mark II plugins, okay? So those are pretty CPU intensive plugins. It's, again, not M1 certified, not even Big Sur certified. And this is the second version. If you're not familiar with the TubeTech CL1B, the real hardware piece is a fan-freaking-tastic compressor. It's in the vibe feel of an LA2A kind of thing, but one of my all-time favorite compressors and one of my all-time favorite plug-in compressors. On top of that, I've got 80 BrainWorks SSL 4000 channel strips. That's 80 of those. Then in addition to that, I've got 80 McDSP 4030 Retro plugins on there, okay? So I've almost got close to 240 plugins on this session. I've got, again, 5 stereo sends for every audio track, as well as 4 outboard I/O being used in this session. So let's pull up Pro Tools and let's see what we've got here from a system usage is concerned. So now you can see here, before I even hit starting here and playing, you know, it's currently saying it's using around 60 some odd % of the CPU. You get down in here and the disk, once we get started, barely even be touched. These SSDs on these things are absolutely insane. And the memory, it looks like we're using about 65% of what Pro Tools sees as its memory. Again, down here as well as down here, these other things, they're just insignificant, not being touched. Now let's pull up my statistic data here, and this is going to show what the entire computer is using, not just Pro Tools. So around 78% of my entire computer is being used of processing, as well as here you can see between the yellow and the red, that's the physical RAM it's actually taking up. The rest of this is cache, so it's actually not hitting on the majority of my physical RAM, but that's one of the things that's very cool about these new M1 and M1 Pro and M1 Max processors or computers is that they're able to actually utilize cache on the SSD for additional RAM. It's pretty spectacular the way it works. So a 16 gig on an Intel machine is nothing like 16 gig on these new machines, okay? So let's do what you came here for. Let's hit play. And let's go back over to this one over here. Let me unplug that so you're not hearing that over there. And so give me just a second here, and let's go back over to my, hang on, I'm sorry, let me click in here because I'm not clicking in there. That's why it's doing that to me. And let's go over to my mix window. All right, so as you can see here, you can kind of see what's going on. All these tracks are playing across the whole session and everything. Now, you are getting a slight little bit of lag or whatever in the GUI on this, but you kind of have to expect that to some degree. Let's go back over to our mix window. Yep, we've got that going on. So the whole song is not quite playing yet. So let's give that a second to catch up, or better yet, let's go over here and skip through to an area where we're seeing everything kind of going at the same time, okay? And so as you can see here, we've got a lot going on in this session, and you can see here, I'm already getting ready to push 100, and that's probably as I'm going through the GUI. So this is pushing the system pretty heavily, pretty strongly. And you can see up here, it's getting close to maxing out the whole thing. So this is about as far as you're going to be able to push this system. But if you think about it, 240 unsupported tracks that are already normally, some of them, CPU intensive plugins compared to if I just put nothing but Waves plugins on this or just basic stock plugins, I would get a lot more, and I mean a lot more plugins going. So what this is going to show is that if you're currently dealing with some unsupported stuff and you're worried about taking that plunge, well, this shows what can at least be done, and you can compare that to the type of typical sessions that you have out there. So anyway, you can see this kind of going here, going back and forth. You can see the window here. All of these tracks are going at the same time. All of these things happening. We go back over to the mix window and come back over here. And just for the record, you know, the fans just came on. Okay. The fans, I can barely hear them, but the fans have come on the computer. Okay. And so you can see here's where they're running. You probably can't see that well, but they're into the 4,000-ish RPMs as far as that's concerned. Certainly nowhere near max. But you can see here where 100%, almost all of my CPU is being used. And I still have a ton of memory. That's what I mean. You've got to think about that memory in a different way. So anyway, as you can see here, this ultimately, because these things are not M1 certified or even Big Sur, let alone, and this is Monterey, by the way, keep that in mind too. I bet it would actually perform even better if it was on Big Sur. I have had some issues with Monterey and some plugins, even some basic stock plugins with Pro Tools that I had no issue with over on Big Sur. So as you can see here, all this stuff is playing. We got a lot of stuff going on. Total of 80 audio tracks with almost 240, 237-ish plugins, all going through hardware stuff. I can see the dials going on my compressors over there. All the needles and everything are moving and they're being used. So I don't know about you, but I think this is pretty freaking impressive for a laptop. So, all right. So if you like that, you know, I want to encourage you, go back and watch my other video, especially use virtual instruments, which many of you do, and go take a look at that. And if anybody's got any other recommendations on kind of how they'd like me to test the system, I mean, this is about as real world as it gets. I don't know how many of us out there on a regular basis are using that many audio tracks, that many plugins, that many sends, that much hardware I/O all at the same time. But that could be you. It is me sometimes, but for the most part, it's not that much. That's quite a bit more than I would typically ever do. So, especially as far as some of the plugin counts and all those things, I tend to always use a lot of hardware I/O stuff. Now, with my Carbon, I have the ability to never have to worry about that because I can just click in the DSP processing on it and record at zero latency anytime I want. So that helps me take advantage of this even further. Okay, so if you like the things I talk about on this channel, okay, hit that like, subscribe, that notification bell is down below because that's where I put it. And then I encourage you to go back and watch some of my other videos. Again, if you got some suggestions what you'd like to see me do and push this thing, let me know. Until next time, hope every one of you have a freaking M1 day.